Y'all might not believe me, but this is my least favorite one to do. It's time for another prediction video, and up today, the Georgia Bulldogs. I know stuff. Oh yeah, good morning. That is Uncle Lou here. That's right, it is me, Uncle Lou. Lustradamus. Live on LouTube for you. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it also. And to in addition to that, well, hey, make sure you subscribe to the channel. I'm trying to get to 75,000 subscribers by the end of the season. I think we can do it. I need your help. Hit the thumbs up, leave some comments on the videos. Make sure you're subscribed, share the videos out to your friends or on social media. I'd really appreciate it. 75K by the end of the season. Let's see if we can get it done. All right, I am going to do the prediction video for Georgia today, a game-by-game prediction video. You can see I've got the schedule pulled up over here. Follow the same format that we always do. We'll wrap up 2024, who'd they lose, who's coming back, what might they look like this year offensively and defensively, any coaching staff changes, and then we'll take a look at the schedule and go through it game by game, and I'm going to give you a winner and a loser for every single week, and we'll try to figure out what Georgia's record will be in 2025. All right, wrapping up last season for Georgia. Mixed bag for Georgia last year. I think it's an absolute miracle they somehow managed to win the SEC. If you look at Georgia's teams over the last 5 or 6 years, really going back to 2017, last year might have been their worst team. 2020 wasn't great, but that was an odd season for all the obvious reasons. But somehow, in a revamped SEC with the addition of Texas and Oklahoma and no more divisions, Georgia managed to find their way to the SEC championship game in Atlanta and win it, beating Texas in that one, 22-19, an overtime game in Atlanta. That was the game where Carson Beck got hurt at halftime and Gunnar Stockton came in the second half while Georgia was down and led Georgia to a come-from-behind victory over the Longhorns in the SEC championship game. Their second win over Texas last year. They beat Texas, of course, on the road earlier in the year, a convincing win, really, 30-15 on the road in Austin. Their losses, of course, came to Alabama because that's just what Kirby Smart and Georgia teams do. They lose to Alabama. It's like clockwork. It's an Ohio State-Michigan situation going on with Georgia and Alabama. It almost doesn't matter who the better team is anymore. And apparently it doesn't matter who the coaches are. Alabama and Michigan both had new coaches last year, yet Alabama and Michigan just continue to beat Georgia and Alabama respectively every single year. It really seems not to matter. So they lost that one early in the year. That was the wild game where Georgia went down by 30 points or something in the first half, massive comeback in the second half, actually taking the lead late in that game with a couple of minutes to go, and then the crazy play by Ryan Williams at the end gives Bama the 41-34 win, a home game for Bama. And Georgia's first loss of the year. They then lost on the road at Ole Miss, probably the worst game they played all year, I think. They just got manhandled along the lines of scrimmage and just looked unmotivated. It was just a bad performance all the way around. They rebounded, beat Tennessee the following week convincingly 31-17 at home, and finished up the regular season with a miracle win against Georgia Tech, a game they probably should have lost. I think they got outplayed in that game. A crazy 8 overtime game, and Georgia somehow comes out on top 44-42. And then, of course, the win against Texas in the SEC championship game, punching their ticket to the playoffs. They got a first-round bye, then played Notre Dame in a Sugar Bowl where they lost. That was Gunnar Stockton's first and only start of his career was in that Sugar Bowl, and Georgia's offense was absolutely pitiful in that game. The offensive line was bad. They had no running game at all. Gunnar Stockton was actually one of the best players offensively in that game for Georgia. If you go back and watch it, he completed over 50% of his passes for about 250 yards with no interceptions. He did have the one fumble in his own red zone, which was very costly. Notre Dame scored a touchdown off of that fumble, but he got blindsided because an offensive lineman whiffed on a block. Not a good performance for Georgia offensively, and they get eliminated in the second round of the playoffs, their first playoff game, because they got a bye in the first round, and that's how Georgia's season wrapped up last year. All right, let's talk about who they're losing, who's coming back. Almost a totally revamped offense for Georgia in 2025, which might end up being a good thing. They were pretty bad offensively last year. They led the nation in dropped passes. They had 3 of the top 10 players nationwide in terms of dropped passes. Georgia's never been known as a school or a university that sort of recruits a bunch of top level athletes at the wide receiver position. There's been a few outliers here and there, most recently Ladd McConkey. You go back to A.J. Green, George Pickens, of course, is having a pretty good NFL career. But generally speaking, Georgia's not known as a team that has great wide receivers year in and year out. But I don't know that I've ever seen a season with Georgia's wide receivers like I saw last year. It was just mind-boggling, the number of wide open catches that wide receivers were dropping last year. You almost felt bad for Carson Beck at certain points during the season. Of course, he didn't do himself any favors with some of the body language stuff on the sidelines. And of course, he turned into an interception machine for a 4 or 5 game period in the middle of the season. But Carson Beck is gone, and almost all the wide receivers are gone. And even the ones that return may not start. Georgia cleaned up in the portal when it comes to wide receivers, bringing in Zachariah Branch to play the slot, Noah Thomas to play on the outside. You pair him with Colby Young, who, while on Georgia's roster last year, was suspended early in the season. He's now back. So you finally got your 2 big bodies on the outside that you've sort of been waiting on in Noah Thomas and Colby Young. Zachariah Branch, a former 5-star recruit who transfers in from Southern Cal, will play in the slot along with several other receivers for UGA. And Dylan Bell is back too, kind of an Army knife type player. I mean, he can play running back if he has to. He can play in the slot. He can play on the outside. We've seen him line up in sort of an H-back position, kind of a do-it-all player. Not really by design sometimes, but sort of out of necessity because Georgia has just been lacking in sort of some of those skill positions, particularly last year, and had to move them around a lot. Injuries at running back, different things like that. So I actually think Georgia's wide receiver group may be one of the most improved position groups in the country. I don't think Georgia's going to have one of the best wide receiver rooms in the country. But listen to what I'm saying. They were so bad last year. In other words, if you were to rate Georgia's wide receiver room last year out of 135 teams, however we have now, they're probably around 100, 110 ranked wide receiver room in the country. So even if they're the 50th best wide receiver room in the country this year, that's an improvement of 50 spots or whatever, and they're probably a little bit better than 50. They're going to have to stay healthy. They don't have a lot of depth at that position, at least not high level depth. They also got some young kids that haven't played a whole lot that potentially could do well for Georgia down the road. So I am excited about the wide receiver position for Georgia this year, especially in comparison to last year. Now, the problem is, or I don't know that it's necessarily a problem. I don't think Gunnar Stockton is going to be the type of guy that stands in the pocket and makes the throws that Carson Beck played. They're not the same style of quarterback. Whatever you think about Carson Beck, and some Georgia fans, hate him now because he transferred out and they pretend like he was never any good. Carson Beck has 2 of the best 5 passing seasons in Georgia history of all time. The reality is he was a really good quarterback. He ran the offense well. Did the team love him? Was he like a favorite amongst the team? Probably not. He did have some body language issues. I don't think he's much of a sort of natural born leader, at least not as much as maybe you would hope for from the quarterback position. But from a talent perspective, the guy can make every throw in the book. I don't think that's what Gunnar Stockton is. He's not going to stand in the pocket and sort of make all those types of throws. Not that he can't throw the ball. He can. But he's more of a scramble around, get him out on the edge type of guy. He can take off and run. That is an improvement over what Carson Beck could do. Now, he's not, Jalen Milroe or Lamar Jackson. He's not one of these straight line speed guys who's going to have a bunch of 70-yard highlight touchdown scrambles or anything like that. He's more in the style of a Tim Tebow, a Haynes King at Georgia Tech, what was the guy's name at Notre Dame? Riley Leonard, right? 3rd and 3, he's probably going to get you 4 yards if that's the play you decide to call, whether it's a quarterback draw or a quarterback lead, whatever it happens to be. He's not afraid to go between the tackles. He's not afraid to put his head down. He's not afraid of contact. So we'll see how that sort of plays out. I think that's important because some of that might help Georgia's run game, which was absolutely abysmal last year. Probably Georgia's worst running back situation or performance last year in at least 20 years. You definitely got to go back pre-Todd Gurley. So you're talking before 2012, before Georgia had a running back situation and production as bad as it was last year. Nate Frazier's back, had almost 1,000 yards last year as a true freshman, got to clean up some of the fumble issues that sort of hounded him last year. They bring in McCray from Illinois, who's a veteran workhorse type big back that can bang between the tackles, which is important because that's not what Nate Frazier is. He's more of an on the edge, get him out in space type of guy. Nate Frazier is not somebody you want running the ball between the tackles 15 or 20 times a game. McCray is. One of my favorite stats about McCray is that he has 0 career fumbles lost. That's obviously very important, turning the ball over. Not part of very many offensive coordinators' game plan. My biggest concern about Georgia on the offensive side of the ball, which is probably not a surprise to anybody, is going to be offensive line. Now, again, this is a glass half full, glass half empty type of situation. Georgia's offensive line last year was terrible. Now, individually, there was a lot of talent there. I think it was 3 of those guys got drafted. So there's obviously individual talent last year along that offensive line. But for whatever reason, they did not play well as a unit. You can attribute some of that maybe to injury, but beyond that, they just did not play well as a unit. It was one of the worst offensive lines I think Georgia has put on the field in Kirby's tenure in Athens, which dates back to 2016. So on one hand, you go, good riddance. It didn't work out with those guys last year. But on the other hand, when you lose 4 starters, that means you got 4 first-year starters that are now playing. And even though Georgia recruits well every single year, top 5 recruiting classes for 9 years in a row, and a lot of talented offensive linemen on that roster, like last year's offensive line, you don't know if they're going to be any good or not until you actually see them do it on a Saturday in the fall, right? It's sort of a weird situation because you say 4 new starters. Both of the starting tackles heading into this year have starting experience. You got Monroe Freeling on one side, Ernest Green on the other. They rotated sort of in and out last year at the left tackle position. You had some injuries along the way for Georgia on the offensive line, which allowed other players to get starts that weren't technically starters. So when you say they're losing 4 starting offensive linemen, that is true. It's also true that they have 2 returning offensive linemen starters in Monroe Freeling and Ernest Green, who will man the tackle positions. It looks like Mike Bobo's son is going to play center, which I'm not excited about. I'm not a fan of nepotism in general. He wasn't a highly rated recruit. He's only on Georgia's team because Mike Bobo is his dad. That's literally the only reason. Doesn't necessarily mean that he's bad. But I don't have a lot of confidence in these coaches' kids type situations, whether you're talking about Shador at Colorado, Dabo has done it at Clemson. There's lots of examples of this that's going on around college football. And I'm just not a fan of the nepotism thing. I think if your kid is good enough to play college football, he should play somewhere else, out from up under your wing type of deal. And even though Mike Bobo's not the head coach, he's the offensive coordinator. And look, anytime Mike Bobo blows a block or or his kid blows a block, you're going to have people go, well, he's only out there because Bobo's his dad. And they're probably right. The offensive line is going to have to play much better. I think that is the key to Georgia's offense in 2025. The quarterback situation is going to get a lot of the attention because it's the quarterback situation, right? And you lose Carson Beck. Now you got Gunnar Stockton. The obvious inclination is going to be to compare one to the other constantly all season long. And I get that. Everybody loves to talk about quarterbacks. You don't need a first-round quarterback. You don't need a top 5 pick at the quarterback position in order to have a really, really good season. And that's proven to be true in the last 3 or 4 years, especially. In fact, if you look at the last 4 national title-winning teams, you're talking about Will Howard, J.J. McCarthy, and Stetson Bennett. You're not talking about Cam Ward, Shador Sanders, Caleb Williams, whatever, C.J. Stroud at Ohio State. Just, rattle off the best 5, 6, 7, 8 quarterbacks you can think of over the last couple of years in college football. None of them won national titles. The quarterbacks that have won national titles over the last 3 or 4 years have been quarterbacks who are not going to lose the game for you, who are surrounded by really good players. Is that Georgia? That remains to be seen. The talent is there, but it's all brand new. You flip over to the defensive side of the ball, and again, you got a lot of new faces. Biggest concern, outside pass rusher, edge position. No returning experience for Georgia at either edge. They lost a couple of players to the draft, a couple of players to graduation, a couple of players to the transfer portal, and really just got depleted at that sort of outside edge position. They did go into the portal and bring the kid in from Army. He's going to play edge, defensive tackle. We'll see how they use him. I thought the kid out of North Carolina that entered the portal was better. the portal rankings list the Army guy as the better player. I don't know. He's going to have to hit. Georgia needs help at that position. They've got, is it Gabe Wilson, I think is his name, is going to start on the other side. He's a first-year guy. I've got it written down here in my notes. Let me scroll and find it here. Where is he? Gabe Harris, sorry. Yeah, Gabe Harris Jr., who missed the spring. So you got a guy that's never played, really, and he missed the spring. And on the other side, probably a transfer from Army. So big question mark at the edge position for Georgia. Now, the interior of the defensive line, I actually think could be a strength for Georgia this year, and that was not the case last year. And maybe that was expected, at least to take a little bit of a step back, I guess, should have been expected after losing players like Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter. Georgia got kind of spoiled on the interior of the defensive line for a 3 or 4 year period. They had those two guys sort of manning the middle of the line, and it was just next to impossible to run on Georgia with those two guys there. So not unexpected, I guess, that it took a step back last year, but the production just wasn't there. But they do have some definite talent and some experience, a great mix of talent and experience returning on the interior of the defensive line with Kristen Miller, Jordan Hall, Xavier McLeod. They've got a 5-star Elijah Griffin, who I would expect sees the field early and often as a true freshman this season for Georgia. I actually think that could be a strength to the defense, the interior of the defensive line. In the secondary, it's kind of a mixed bag. They lose a couple of players, but they bring a couple of really good players back. Dalen Everett, who's the most experienced player on Georgia's team, period, is going to be locking down one of those corner positions. They still have to figure out the other side. KJ Bolden returns at safety, who started last year as a true freshman and is a potential All-American candidate heading into this year. He's not Caleb Downs. Caleb Downs clearly the best safety in college football. But whoever you want to put in sort of the tier 2 safeties this year in college football, I think KJ Bolden clearly falls into that category and could move himself into tier 1 with a really good season. So mixed bag, some returning, some new, some transfers. Georgia recruits extremely well on the defensive side of the ball. Talent will not be an issue over there. It's another situation where, we just have to see the guys do it on the field on Saturday. Let's talk about the odds for Georgia in 2025. How many games is Georgia expected to win? The Vegas number here sits at 9.5. You know what that means? You bet on this number over under. You think Georgia's going to win more than 9.5 games? You bet over. 10-2, 11-1, 12-0. You think they're going to win less than 9.5? You bet the under. 9-3, 8-4, 7-5, whatever it is. 9.5 wins is low for Georgia. Hasn't been this low in a long time, but it's the highest in the SEC. There's not a single team in the SEC with a win total over 9.5. I think Alabama's at 9.5, and I think Texas is at 9.5. Everyone else is below that. So 9.5 low compared to where Georgia's been in the last couple of years, but still the highest in the SEC. You look at the chances to win the Southeastern Conference. The two teams at the top of the odds are the two teams that played for the Southeastern Conference Championship last year, Texas and Georgia. And it is very close. Texas is a small favorite at plus 280. Georgia right behind them at plus 290. So a virtual dead heat in terms of the favorite to win the SEC in 2025. And of course, those two teams play again in the regular season, this time in Athens. We're going to talk about that here in just a second. Third place in terms of the odds for the SEC is Alabama, followed by LSU, then Texas A&M at plus 1,500, a massive long shot there for Texas A&M. So Georgia, second best odds to win the SEC. What about winning it all, the national title, right? Georgia is one of these handful of teams that you have to consider as a possibility to win the national title every single year. When you recruit in the top 5 every single year for as many years in a row as Georgia has, that's the sort of situation you find yourself in, along with Texas, Ohio State, Alabama, Oregon, sort of the same sort of teams you hear talked about almost every single year in terms of this is a team that could win it all. Georgia's in that conversation. When you look at the odds to win it all, the second best odds in all of college football to win the national title, which is surprising to Uncle Lou, not going to lie. I think that's a little too high. This seems like just a lot of question marks around Georgia this year. Again, it's not a talent question. It's a we've never seen these players before type of issue, right? Texas is the favorite to win the national title. Their odds are plus 550. Georgia right behind them at plus 600, tied with Ohio State. So Georgia and Ohio State tied with the second best odds behind Texas. Penn State is fourth at plus 750, followed by Alabama at plus 1,100 and Oregon at plus 1,100. So those 6 teams are the favorites sort of to win the national title. You get beyond that and you start getting to some of your long shot choices: Michigan, Texas A&M, Miami, Ole Miss, Oklahoma, so on, forth down the list. Notre Dame's on here. Clemson. I think Clemson's got a legitimate shot, maybe even Notre Dame. Beyond that, you start talking about the long shots, though. So those are your odds. That's what the betting market feels about Georgia heading into the season. What do I feel about Georgia heading into the season? Let's go through the schedule game by game. I'm going to give you a winner and a loser for every single week. Let me start off by saying this. Nobody is going to make the playoffs every single year for the next 100 years in a row, including Georgia. Nobody is going to beat all of their rivals every single year from now to the end of time, including Georgia. Georgia has three main rivals, three historical rivals, Florida, Georgia Tech, and Auburn. They've beat all three of them every year for 4 years in a row. They did lose to Florida in 2020. But since then, they have beat Florida, Auburn, and Georgia Tech, all three, every single year. It's 4 years straight, no losses to their rivals. That's not going to last forever. A lot of questions for Georgia. If the offensive line doesn't work out, it doesn't matter how good Gunnar Stockton is. It doesn't matter how good the wide receivers are. And it doesn't matter how improved the running game is. If Georgia's offensive line cannot take a massive step forward over what they did last year, Georgia's in serious danger of missing the playoffs, in my opinion. 9-3 is a real possibility for this Georgia team. There's a reason the win total is at 9.5. New quarterback. I went through it all, right? There's also a possibility Georgia goes 10-2 or 11-1 and ends up in Atlanta with a shot to win the SEC championship again. I mean, I think outside of Texas probably has the least number of questions of any SEC team. But even they have a new quarterback in Arch Manning and lost a lot of talent to the NFL last year. And they got to play at Georgia. They lost to Georgia twice last year, Texas did, at home and on a neutral site. This year they play them in Athens. It feels like one of those years where, well, I guess the best way to put it as far as how I feel about Georgia heading into the season, and I'm going to get to the prediction in a second. When I looked at Georgia over the last 3 or 4 years, I said, this is a tight window here. They're either going 10-2, 11-1, or 12-0. Like you look at the schedule, you look at the roster, you look at who's returning, and there just was really no way Georgia was going to lose 3 games. It would have been an absolute shock had that happened. This season, I would not at all be shocked to see Georgia go 9-3. They've got a tough schedule again. They play Bama, they play Texas, they play Tennessee, they play Auburn, they play Florida, they play Georgia Tech at the end of the year. These are all teams that are capable of beating Georgia if Georgia doesn't show up and play its best game. And we saw them last year. They did not do that nearly enough of the time. There's a real possibility for Georgia to miss the playoffs this year. It feels to me like Georgia is poised to trade places this season with either Texas or Alabama from last year. Now, Georgia's my favorite team. I don't hide that on this channel. I obviously would prefer Georgia trade places with Texas and maybe go 10-2, don't win the SEC, but still get into the playoffs, kind of the Tennessee route from last year. Fingers crossed as a Georgia fan that that's what happens. There's also a very strong possibility that Georgia goes 9-3 or worse if the wheels fall off and is one of those teams on the outside of that sort of playoff bubble looking in on that last Sunday after conference championship Saturday, and they sort of miss out on the playoffs this season. I think both of those things are realistic possibilities. And if you look at the expected win total again at 9.5, I think that reflects that, right? We saw last year 9-3, 10-2 was kind of the cutoff point. Now, I do think there are a lot of scenarios where some 9-3 teams could get in. It's impossible to know that now. It's going to depend on what happens and what are the records of a lot of these other teams in the other conferences, right? I don't think a 9-3 SEC team is going to get in over a 10-2 Big Ten team, for example. So what are the records in all these other conferences and these teams and all that? Who knows? But it feels like 10-2, 9-3 type situation for Georgia. Playoff bubble with potential to win the SEC. Yeah. Potential to go 8-4 and not even have a claim really to the playoffs. All right, let's go through the schedule. Now, the non-con schedule is a joke this year. I hate that, but it is what it is. They do have the Georgia Tech game at the end of the year, which kind of salvages it there, giving them a 9th Power 4 opponent. And just for the record, the last 2 national champions played 9 Power 4 opponents in the regular season. Michigan played 9 Power 4 opponents last year. And 3 non-Power 4 opponents. Michigan 2 years ago. Ohio State last year, same thing. 9 Power 4 opponents and 3 non-Power 4 opponents. So same schedule Georgia plays this year in terms of number of Power 4 opponents. They start off with Marshall and Austin Peay at home. These games aren't worth talking about. Whatever issues or problems you think Georgia has are first world problems. When you talk about issues or concerns with Georgia, you're talking about issues or concerns as it relates to their ability to beat top 5 teams, not to beat Marshall or Austin Peay. Georgia will dominate these games. You'll see a lot of players play in this game. I prefer Georgia starts out with a bigger game generally. You know, they had the Oregon game to start out a couple of years ago. They've played Clemson twice in week 1 in the last few years. I prefer that. It makes the offseason more exciting, gives you something to look forward to early in the season. There was ever a year, though, where Georgia was going to start out the season with two kind of yard turds. No offense to Marshall and Austin Peay. I'm not here to trash talk them, but Georgia's one of the best programs on the planet. They're going to destroy these two teams. There was ever a year Georgia was going to start out with a couple of yard turds like this. This seems like maybe the year to do it. Again, brand new offensive line, new quarterback, new wide receivers, a new running back, a lot of new. So it is what it is. They'll win both of those games. It's a lot harder immediately after that, and I mean a lot harder, on the road at Tennessee. Now, to be fair to Tennessee, I expected them to take a step back this season even before they lost Nico. They lost all of their starting wide receivers for last year. They lost Dylan Sampson, who was the best running back in the SEC, and really the only offense they consistently had last season. Nico did not have a great year. He's gone. Now that you add the departure of Nico to that, they bring in G5 Joey, who's only going to have 3 or 4 weeks of actual practice this fall to sort of pick up the offense and get ready to go. And I do think G5 Joey will be the starting quarterback. I know they've got a couple of young kids on the roster who've been there. I do think it'll be G5 Joey. The game is at Tennessee, and that's always tricky. That is a tough place to play. And this will be Gunnar Stockton, Georgia quarterback, Gunnar Stockton's first ever road game. And it's going to be tricky. And Georgia could lose this game. But I think they get the win on the road in Knoxville. Kirby seems to have solved the riddle that is the Josh Heupel offense. Not only does Tennessee struggle to score against Georgia under Josh Heupel, they struggle to get first downs. They've yet to score more than 2 touchdowns in a game against Georgia in Heupel's, 4 years he's been there now? 4 years he's been there now. For whatever reason, Kirby seems to have solved that riddle. No Dylan Sampson, no Nico, all new wide receivers early in the season. Outside of it being a road game, it's hard to find a reason to pick Tennessee there. I'm going to go with Georgia to get the win on the road. Then they have a bye week before they host Alabama. And in a lot of years, this would probably be Georgia's biggest game of the year. I think Alabama's going to be really good again this year. I think they're going to be improved over last year, particularly when it comes to running the ball. They're going to have one of the best defenses in the SEC. I can't pick Georgia to win the game. I'm sorry. I picked Georgia to lose this game. When I did this video last year at this exact same time, I said Georgia's not beating Bama. I mean, I can't pick Georgia to beat Bama. It's got to happen some before I start picking it to happen. I got murdered in the comments last year by Georgia fans. I'll get murdered in the comments again this year by Georgia fans. Look, just because Georgia's my favorite team doesn't mean I don't have the ability to objectively look at these teams. Is Georgia better than Alabama? I don't know. I mean, last year, yeah. But even then, I couldn't pick Georgia to beat them. This year, I'm not sure Georgia's better than Bama this year. So I definitely can't pick Georgia to beat them. I mean, Kirby's beat them one time. What is he, 1-6 now? Or whatever it is. They get rid of Saban, and you're thinking, okay, Saban was the reason Georgia can't win that game. Then DeBoer comes in and beats him. Same DeBoer that lost to Vandy the next week. It just seems to be some kind of curse or mental hurdles. Again, similar to the Ohio State-Michigan situation that's going on, that Kirby just can't get over. So I hope I'm wrong here, but I've got Alabama coming into Athens and beating Georgia, which would be a massive win. Georgia's got the longest home winning streak in all of college football. They haven't lost a home game since 2019. They've only lost one home game since 2016, and that was to South Carolina in 2019. They lost some home games in 2016, but so they were undefeated at home in 17 and 18, one loss at home in 2019, and undefeated at home since then. I hope I'm wrong. And look, the reality is for Georgia, they have to go 1-1 in those two games. So if you want to say, oh no, we're beating Bama. Okay, well then probably going to lose to Tennessee. You got to go 1-1 there. You cannot come out of the month of September with this schedule already sitting on 2 losses. If they lose to Tennessee and Bama, they're not running the table the rest of the way. First of all, if they lose to Tennessee and Bama, they're not good enough to run the table the rest of the way. And besides that, just look at all the landmines left in October and November. They're not navigating that without taking another loss. So they've got to go 1-1 in these 2 games here in October in September at Tennessee, home against Bama. I'm going with what's been happening over and over and over again for what seems like forever. Georgia hasn't lost to Tennessee since Kirby's first year, 2016. So I'm picking Georgia to win again. Kirby can't beat Bama to save his life. So I'm picking Bama again. So I've got Georgia 3-1 after their first 4 games. Then a home game against Kentucky. Lucky for Georgia, this is a home game. For whatever reason, they show up in Kentucky like they don't even know what a football is. We saw it again last year on the road up there in Lexington. They just play like they don't know what they're doing. At home, that has not been the case. I would expect them to handle business against what I think is going to be another bad Kentucky team. Then they got to go on the road and play Auburn. And you know what? I'm going to skip the Auburn game for right now. Well, let's go to the Ole Miss game. Georgia lost this game last year on the road in Oxford. Trivia here. Name the 2 teams that Kirby has a losing record to. Well, he's got a losing record to Bama. Does he have a losing record to LSU? I believe he's lost to LSU twice and beat them once. And he's got a losing record to Ole Miss. Yes, a losing record to Ole Miss. He lost to Ole Miss in 2016, beat Ole Miss in 2023, lost to them in 2024. So those are the 3 teams in the SEC Kirby's got a losing record to. They're not losing to Ole Miss at home. I'll give Bama the win in Athens. I don't see Ole Miss coming into Athens and winning. They've got a ton of turnover on that team. They lost a lot of the talent off of last year's team, new quarterback. Some of their best defensive players are gone. Now, I think Lane Kiffin's too good of a coach for Ole Miss to fall off the cliff and win 4 or 5 games. Same thing for Tennessee, by the way. I think Tennessee probably wins 7 or 8 games. I think Ole Miss wins 7 or 8 games, maybe even 9. But I don't think Ole Miss is winning this game in Athens. I'm going to give Georgia the win there. Then a bye week before the Florida game. We're going to come back to that one. I'm going to skip all 3 of Georgia's rivals and come back to them. On the road at Mississippi State. If there's a team worse than Kentucky, they're named to Mississippi State. Georgia will not lose that game. Georgia will beat Mississippi State. Home against Texas. Texas might be not just the best team in the SEC, but maybe the best team in the country. Could be. But no one's going undefeated, including Texas. I mean, we saw this last year. Oregon was the only Power 4 team in the country last year to go undefeated. That was it. They were the only one that went 12-0. And they turned around and lost their first playoff game. Not only did they lose it, they got absolutely destroyed. Now, to be fair, it was by Ohio State, who just hit another gear and was on another level in the postseason. But still, the point is it's extremely hard to go undefeated. And losing a game does not mean what it used to mean in the world of college football. You could lose a game even to, again, see Ohio State last year, and still go on to win it all. That could be the case with Texas, but they're losing in Athens. This has become sort of not a rivalry, but it's sort of a mini rivalry from last year to now. A lot of recruiting stuff has gone on between Georgia and Texas. They, of course, played twice last year with Georgia getting the better of them. I think Georgia gets the three-peat at home in Athens. I think they beat the Longhorns in what will be a game of the year type situation in Athens. One of the biggest home games in Athens in a long, long time. Late in the year, middle of November, 2 top 10 teams, at least, maybe potentially top 5 teams. Then they play Charlotte for no reason at all. This is why the SEC needs to go to 9 games. This is absolutely ridiculous. I agree with everyone outside the SEC. I'm going to make a separate video on this. But Greg Sankey, Kirby Smart, and everyone else in the SEC, including the fans who back this 8 conference game idea, you're wrong. You're wrong, and everyone else is right. This is ridiculous. You need to go to 9 games. But again, another video for another day. Georgia will beat the soul and will to live out of Charlotte for no reason at all. And then the game on the road at Georgia Tech, kinda. Georgia Tech doesn't care about football. They care about money a little bit. So they sold the rights to their home game in a rivalry game to Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Now, you might say, well, it doesn't matter. It's still in Atlanta. True. However, the tickets are split, too. You can see this has been given a pointless name, the Invesco QQQ Atlanta Gridiron Classic. So here we go with yet another pointless neutral site game in the world of college football. Absolutely pointless. absolutely ridiculous. But Georgia Tech, it's a $10 million payday for Georgia Tech. Mercedes-Benz Stadium paid Georgia Tech $10 million to move this game from Bobby Dodd Stadium to Mercedes-Benz Stadium. So it is what it is. It's not Georgia's fault. This was Georgia Tech's home game, and they chose to sell it. So it is what it is. This can't be blamed on Georgia, but this is obviously ridiculous to be playing this thing neutral site. It will not be a neutral site game next year when it's Georgia's turn to host. That game will be played in Athens like it's supposed to. At least it better be. This was probably the luckiest win Georgia had last year. They got outplayed massively in this game and should have lost in regulation. And then probably should have lost in overtime. But by some miracle, they didn't. Big comeback in the second half to send it to overtime. It goes to 8 overtimes, and Georgia sort of hangs on to win that thing against Georgia Tech. It feels to me like last year was Georgia Tech's shot to get Georgia, and they blew it. That's how it feels to me. I do think Georgia Tech will be a good team this year. In fact, I think they could compete to win the ACC, maybe. A lot's going to depend on what they do with Clemson early in the year. But I think Georgia Tech's a good team. Haynes King's a gritty player. There's no doubt about it. They're at a massive talent gap between Georgia and Georgia Tech. Now, last year that didn't seem to matter, and maybe it won't matter again. But Georgia Tech has only beat Georgia 3 times this century. Georgia has completely dominated this rivalry. And I feel like a couple of years down the road, Georgia Tech fans are going to look back at last year's game, and it's going to hurt even worse because they're going to look at that as the game that they could have won. I don't think they're going to come quite that close again, at least not for the next couple of years. I like Brent Key and what he's doing there. He's an obvious upgrade over Jeff Collins, and I think he's a good coach. I think they have a good staff. I think Buster Faulkner is a good offensive mind. They've got some decent players, but they lost their best wide receiver to the portal. They don't recruit well enough to really be able to backfill things like that. And as much as I like Haynes King, he's not much of a thrower of the football. He reminds me of Riley Leonard last year, and you're going to say, well, Riley Leonard made the national title game. Well, Notre Dame made the national title game behind defense and a great running game. He was kind of a liability when it came to throwing the ball, Riley Leonard, and I sort of feel that way about Haynes King. I do think Haynes King is a better thrower than Riley Leonard. Riley Leonard's probably a little bit better of a runner maybe, but anyway, we're getting into the weeds on that. Georgia Tech could win this game. They think they can win it, and that's an improvement over where they were at 5 years ago for sure, when they were kind of just rolling the ball out on the field and taking their L and going home. You know, I just feel like they're going to look back on last year's game and just say, God, we blew it, and that was our chance. I think Georgia beats Georgia Tech. All right, so let's go back to the other 2 rivals in reverse order. We'll start with Florida. I'm not that high on Florida in terms of what their record is going to be. You can blame it on the schedule. You can blame it on whatever you want. The reality is, if you want to win a national championship, you got to beat good teams, whether you do it in the regular season or the postseason. So is Florida, are they serious about winning a national championship or not? I don't think they are, because they're deciding to keep Billy Napier for no reason at all, period. Is DJ Lagway a good quarterback? Yeah, he's really, really good. So was Cam Ward last year. Didn't make the playoffs, and he was on a better team than what Florida has with an easier schedule. Shedeur Sanders at Colorado, great quarterback. Didn't make the playoffs, though, did he? Caleb Williams a couple of years ago, no playoffs. C.J. Stroud, no national. I mean, this idea that because you have a good quarterback means all of a sudden you're going 100-0. You're not. You were never one quarterback away. You're a head coach away, is what you are. Billy Napier doesn't know what he's doing. I think Florida, like last year, is going to lose the majority of the games they play. That didn't come out right. I'm not convinced they'll have a losing record, so that would be the majority of the games. They got a brutal schedule. I do think that, like last year, they're going to beat a couple of teams that maybe when you look at the schedule right now, you don't give them a shot to win. They play Texas early in the year at home. I think Florida wins that game against Texas. They play on the road at Texas A&M. I think that could be a competitive game. They play at Miami early in the year. That could be a competitive game. They're also going to lose, I think, a couple of games that they won last year. The LSU game, they won at home. I think LSU's better this year, and they got to play on the road at LSU. Anyway, this isn't a Florida preview or prediction video, but I don't think Florida's beating Georgia. I don't think Billy Napier will ever beat Kirby Smart. I'll just go ahead and say it. And I'm never going to predict it, at least until he does. I don't think he's a good head coach. He still won't hire an offensive coordinator, at least not a real one. He's got an offensive coordinator on paper, but he still calls his own plays. He thinks he's better than he is. And I just think that they don't have what it takes to beat Georgia. Both teams will be coming off of a bye week. Georgia will get the win against Florida. So that brings us to the game at Auburn. I think Georgia gets beat by Auburn this year. I just don't believe Georgia's going to continue to beat all three of their rivals every single year from now to the end of time. Auburn is a talented team. Now, their recruiting this year is in the toilet. There's no doubt about it, and that's a separate issue going forward that they're going to have to deal with, and that is what it is. But if you look at their last 2 or 3 recruiting classes, they've done pretty well, and they've done good in the portal. Quarterback has been their problem. And while I'm not convinced that Jackson Arnold is going to show up in Auburn and flip a switch and be an amazing quarterback, I do think that if there's an amazing quarterback somewhere inside Jackson Arnold, which we didn't see last year, I do think Hugh Freeze is more apt to pull it out of him than Brent Venables was at Oklahoma last year. Complete reboot for Jackson Arnold, getting out of Oklahoma, landing at Auburn. I think he is the type of quarterback that Hugh Freeze needs, an athletic, mobile QB with an arm. But if he turns the ball over, Auburn's going to have some of the same issues and problems they had last year. Auburn's got a great wide receiver room. Can Jackson Arnold take advantage of that? We'll see. I think they're going to have a pretty good defense. I don't think Auburn's winning 9 or 10 games, and I think there's a possibility Hugh Freeze gets fired at some point this season or by the end of the season. But like Florida, I do think Auburn will win a game or two that people don't see coming, and I think it's going to be this one. Georgia plays 2 of the most physical teams in the SEC in back-to-back weeks before this Auburn game. They have Alabama at home. They've got Kentucky at home. Those are 2 of the most physical lines of scrimmage team in all of the SEC. They're then going to turn around and have to go on the road to Auburn, where if you've been a college football fan for any amount of time at all, you've seen all kinds of weird shit happen in games at Auburn. I think Georgia drops that one to Auburn. I think Georgia goes 10-2. I don't know if that's going to get them into the SEC championship game or not. I've got Alabama at 11-1. So I obviously have Alabama making the SEC championship game because I've got Bama at 11-1, a win over Georgia. So I've got Alabama getting in. There's probably going to be 2 or 3 teams at the end of the year all sitting at 10-2 in the SEC with Bama at 11-1. So that'll put Bama in, and then it'll be a tiebreaker situation between those teams that are 10-2. I've got Georgia beating Texas. So if Texas is 10-2 and Georgia is 10-2 and Georgia beats Texas, I guess that would put Georgia ahead of Texas. But if it's a 3-way tie, then it's not just head-to-head. You go to the next tiebreaker, and it gets almost impossible to figure out. So I'm not prepared yet to say whether or not I think Georgia is making the SEC championship game. But at 10-2 with this schedule, I do think Georgia gets into the playoffs again in 2025. I've got Georgia at 10-2, losses on the road to Auburn and at home to Alabama. Be sure and let me know down below how stupid I am, and have a good morning.